I go into these classrooms and I talk about these superpowers with these kids, I will tell you that you'll see these kids and like you'll talk about ADHD and you might see these kids like, when they don't really say anything. And then by the end, when I'm like, Simone Biles, she has ADHD. And they're like, she's a gymnast. I'm a gymnast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. I am your host, Jorie Houlihan. I am an ADHD life coach, public speaker, and your guide for the dopamine deprived. I am very excited to introduce today's guest. This is Kelly Kustusch, and her mission is to help families of children with ADHD and anxiety create calmer homes, stronger school partnerships, and more confident kids. She created Guided Growth Consulting LLC to support parents in building practical tools and strategies so their children can thrive academically, socially, and emotionally, both inside and outside the classroom. Parenting a child with ADHD and or anxiety can feel very overwhelming, especially if you too have ADHD and or anxiety. But with the right tools and mindset, small changes lead to big shifts. So welcome to the podcast, Kelly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, so let's just dive right in here. Your journey has spanned teaching, parenting, and advocacy, right? So, what was the personal tipping point that inspired you to launch Guided Growth Consulting?
Sure. So my background is in elementary education, and I taught kindergarten and first grade, and I was a stay-at-home mom. And then as life evolved, I one of my children was ADHD or is ADHD. One has anxiety. And about 8 years ago, I helped develop a disability awareness program where we go into schools and we bring all different kinds of awareness about physical disabilities, hidden disabilities, which then turns into neurodivergent disabilities. And being within these classrooms, I was really seeing such a big surge, especially after COVID, that there was so much ADHD and a lot of things that were happening with behavior. So originally I thought, oh, I would just let's go into the schools and help change the curriculum and do all of these different things. And then when I really thought about it, I realized how difficult it was just for us to get into these schools to bring awareness and kindness, all about disabilities. So I thought, how am I going to change the world? Right. So,
Go big
so,
or go home.
right. So, one step at a time, I figured, why not talk to families and parents? And everything starts at the home. So that's really where I evolved.
I really love that you're doing this because all schools could use a lot more of this. You talk about small shifts in perspective
Mhm.
leading to big changes. So, can you share a story where maybe a simple mindset change made all the difference for a family or for a parent?
Sure. And I do like to preface that. I mean, a lot of these things that we're doing are simple, right? And they're things you might already be doing, but sometimes it's just a little bit of a change of perspective. So I had a mom call me because she was really upset about the homework battles that they were having at home. And obviously, we all have these homework battles, right? And kids not wanting to do things, but it was really taking over their house. There was screaming, there was yelling. So we decided just to do, I have this method, it's called more of the trigger tracker method. And you go through and you really are just evaluating the behaviors and why the behaviors are going on, right? So what we were realizing was that every time that he had to sit down and do his homework, his little sister got screen time. Well, from the mom's perspective, of course the kid was having her sister was having screen time because that was her way of having something to do while her brother was doing homework and didn't distract him. But he didn't see it that way. He only saw it as she gets screen time, she gets a reward, and I have to sit here and do my homework and I don't want to. So we just worked on something so simple as just transitions and doing something else. And what are the things that he loved, like playing with Legos or riding his bike. So then he got 10 minutes of whatever it is he wanted to do as his reward before he started the homework. So it was more just switching around. The reward doesn't necessarily have to be at the end, it could also be at the beginning.
That's a really good point because sometimes we don't understand how that looks from the kid's eyes, right? And so, yeah, he's seeing it as I'm being punished and she's getting rewards. And it's such a simple change. right? It's
Mhm.
such a simple thing.
And a lot of the things are simple. They really are. And sometimes you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But sometimes when you're in it, and it's not that you don't understand, you're in the moment and there's high emotions, high emotions. ADHD brings high emotions.
Does it ever?
Mm.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question here. So, as you know, many ADHD women listening are both parents and neurodivergent themselves. So,
Mhm.
we have emotional dysregulation all over the place. So, so how do the dynamics shift though when both a child and parent have ADHD? Like, what patterns do you see, and what have you seen helps with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question because we do see that there's so many people that it runs in the family, right? And so it's genetics. And what happens is then you have two ADHD people back and forth at each other. And like we were saying, there's high emotions, and they're not necessarily always negative emotions. It's good emotions too, and positive emotions, but it also brings a lot of chaos. It brings frustration. It brings like a lot of anxiety for people. They set each other off. So like somebody else is running hot and then you run hot and then you're fighting and it's a lot of that. And so I think that you forget to step back. You forget to take the patience that you need in order to really understand the situation.
I can completely relate to that. Yeah, sometimes it is a very the word chaotic is a good word. Like you said though, chaos isn't always necessarily a bad thing, especially if that's kind of all you know. But when there are certain things that have to get done, in particular with schoolwork, that chaos is maybe not so helpful.
And some people thrive with chaos. They really do. It
Yeah.
just depends. We do something in one of our classrooms actually. It's really interesting in 5th grade when we're doing some things with neurodivergent testing. It's for fun, right? It's not to be really actually testing these kids, but it's to show and prove like you have a center that you have to put together a puzzle and it is timed and it's not a difficult puzzle and it's for 5th graders. But you are screaming, being like, hurry up, hurry up. You have a time limit. You have this, you have that. It makes some kids anxious. And there are a lot of kids who then are like, wait, I actually like that. I did really well with you saying, hurry, hurry, hurry. Right. And
Yeah.
so it's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, because it's interesting with ADHD brains because we have a low tolerance for frustration and we can be easily overwhelmed, but at the same time, we tend to thrive when something is challenging or urgent, right? So depending on how that person's brain interprets you going, come on, you go your time, you're being timed. Like they may see that as a challenge and that's all right. And the other one may say, okay, no, I'm totally overwhelmed. So it's really dependent on the kid. And ADHD is a spectrum. So that totally makes sense.
And some ADHD brains, they get stuck. Like you get stuck in a moment. And that has a lot to do with ADHD, right? That you don't know that's a whole other probably podcast we could do.
I know, right? My next question is so you focus on cultivating calm and connection, but as we've just said, many ADHD homes feel anything but calm. So, what are some practical strategies that work when both the child and parent are struggling with the overwhelm?
Sure. I mean, it really can be as simple as actually doing breathing work. You know, I do think it's really important. I do teach that when our sessions, when you start, that we do start every session just with some breath work. And I know that sounds so simple, but it really is that simple in the calmness. I think the most important thing to understand when you are the parent with the child is to try to realize that you guys are the same team. Right? I think that that is really my big thing that we focus on is that we want to work together, right? We're not trying to work apart. And there are other simple things like sitting next to each other. And I mean, you could do like a little cuddle, but if everybody's like uh, at each other and they
Yeah.
don't and they don't want to do that, you can just sit next to each other, right? Like you could sit shoulder to shoulder. There's something about it. Even sometimes I remember when my kids were younger and my ADHD son actually specifically, when he was doing homework and he was overwhelmed or needed to do something, it was more that he just wanted me in the room, right? Like he just wanted, like, we used to call it like moral support. He'd be like, can
Yeah.
you just come with for my moral support? And I would do nothing. I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't do anything. And sometimes that really just helps. And I do think something as simple as walking out of the room, taking a sip of water. And I know it sounds so simple, but when you're in the heat of a moment, it is very difficult to remember to do those things.
Well, and that goes back to when we get stuck, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes you do need to just go take a little walk because it pulls you out of that chaos that your brain is kind of in and forces you to reframe things a little bit.
Well,
So,
it's a little like reconnecting, rewiring, right? That's what you're doing. You're trying to rewire your brain a little bit.
yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I love that you do breath work with people. It seems so simple, and so a lot of people dismiss it,
Mhm.
but I think that being able to just take some deep breaths, it's just a very easy, natural way to calm the central nervous system. Now, sometimes if you're really, like the breathing may not quite work the way you want
Mhm.
it to, because if you're like hyperventilating because you're so, that's not going to
Right.
work. But
No, that's
I,
when you're gonna need to do something like take a walk or
yeah,
separate yourself or remove yourself, right? That's what you need to do. And sometimes go locking yourself in the bathroom is okay.
yeah. And the other part of this too is that as they do this with you, right, as they're learning this, they're starting to see what their patterns are. I talk about patterns a lot because when we start to see what our own individual patterns are with ADHD, because while we all have similar symptoms, how they show up, what our patterns are with them are very different. And it's a spectrum. When they can start to see, oh, when I feel like this, the breathing's not going to work, but a walk will, that's huge. And especially if they can learn that as a kid.
Mhm. Yeah, we do a
Yeah.
lot of that. That's part of like the trigger tracking, right? That's part of doing some emotional regulation and really figuring out the things about yourself. There's a lot of learning about yourself that goes on. And I think that that's also really important to understand. All ADHD brains are different. I mean, like anybody, all our brains work differently, but ADHD brains do work very differently and even more so within each other, right? Like you could have two people with ADHD standing next to each other, and there is no way that the same things that are difficult for one are the same for the other. And there's also the tools that work for one are not the other. So it's also really important. And that's what I do is your plan is very specific to you. If you come to me, I'm not sitting there saying, okay, on session one, this is what we do. And then session two, this is what we do. Everything is different because it's really specified for you.
Case in point, my own family, 3 of us are diagnosed. I'm pretty sure my husband has it too, but all of us look different.
Mhm.
We all look different. We have some similarities, but the things that trigger us, the things that excite us, all different. That's exactly true. So you highlight the concept of superpowers. As you and I both know, kids in particular often only hear about what they're doing wrong, right? What their challenges are. So, how do you help families and these kids identify and celebrate their strengths, especially if they maybe don't even really see it themselves?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of positive reinforcement. I've always thought positive reinforcement is the way to go. I will say, even when I taught in my classrooms before I had children, then when I had children, I really do think that it is something that it really does make a difference. As for the ADHD and all disabilities, especially neurodivergent disabilities, there is so much proof, even just our history of how special, right? People who
Hmm.
have these neurodivergence are like, I mean, you're talking creativity, you're talking athletes, you're talking inventors of our history. And so I think that it's really important if you can find the strengths that you have, because then you excel. And then they become the superpowers. And what happens is when you have these strengths that you're excelling in, the things that are difficult for you, they do start to fall to the wayside because confidence is key. I will say
Oh,
that.
yes.
Right? ADHD or not ADHD, being a confident person in who you are and believing in yourself means everything. And I think that has a lot to do with the superpowers and the strengths.
The confidence makes such a big difference. I've been having a lot of conversations recently about RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Hmm.
And while I'm not a therapist, I want to preface this with this. I do find that a lot of our RSD shows up more often in those areas where we don't feel confident, especially in social interactions where maybe we're feeling out of our element, or even if it's with somebody we really care about, but it's because we feel really vulnerable, which sometimes doesn't always make us feel as confident, which I know that sounds weird, but like if it's like a new person maybe you really like or something like that. But confidence, I mean, with anybody, obviously makes a big difference. But I do find that with neurodivergent kids and adults, it makes a huge difference in how they view the world and themselves.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I do think that's something really important for kids and adults, really. I hope that people are putting themselves in situations where they feel good too. That was always like my big thing as my kids grew up. Everybody wants to be put with these certain people, or you want your best friend's kid to be your kid's best friend and things like that. And I will tell you, that's not always the case, right? Like you should be in a place where you feel like yourself. And if you're feeling like you are not you, you're in the wrong place.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's switch directions here a little bit. So, food intolerances, learning styles, and emotional regulation are all part of your toolkit, right?
Yes.
Okay, so how do you help families untangle what is ADHD and what may be something else?
Yeah, so, like, I'm not a therapist like you were saying and, like, things like that. So, I'm not here to do the neuropsych eval, I'm not here to help you do that. Once you realize you might need some help, whatever that may be, then we will get together, we'll go through, like, all of the different kinds of things that are troubling that you need feel like you need help with, and then within that is when we start talking not only about the mindsets, but we do start talking about learning styles because I have the teacher in me and I'm in these schools and really why I evolved from where I evolved. It's important to kind of realize like, do you have dominant features? Do you have a dominant eyes, ears, your hands, your feet? Do you learn better as a visual learner? Do you learn better as an auditory learner? Do you learn better as a kinesthetic learner, meaning that you need movement? So I think that's really important because not only does that help you in the classroom, it helps you outside the classroom when you're studying, when you're doing things, and then talking to the teachers about it. There is also a lot with like food and diet and things like that go into things with ADHD and everybody, right?
Yeah, and you and I have spoken before about how my dream classroom would be, first of all, more than one teacher in a classroom and smaller classroom sizes, but also that they taught to how kids learned, like the teacher saying, "Okay, so my visual learners, you're going to do this. My auditory learners, you're going to do this. My kinesthetic learners, you're going to do this." So that they are learning the information, they're all learning the same information, but they're learning it the way they absorb it. But then every once in a while, changing it up a little bit and making them switch roles just to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Because perspective taking, sometimes I feel like we're losing that a tad. So, but yeah, I completely agree. Having them understand, I said this to my son. I said, "You learn best by doing, don't you?" He's like, "Oh, yeah." So, him sitting in a classroom studying something he's not interested in has been like torture for him.
Sure. Well, this is part of me, right, trying to change the curriculum. This is where I came from, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is why I started doing this because I do agree with you. And I do think, like, you could even evaluate kids by figuring out the way they learn. So, if you're a visual learner, auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, like, if you're a kinesthetic learner, why can't you do something with movement or diagrams or something else as your assessment, right? Why does everyone have to have the same
Yes.
assessment?
All right. So, what is a common misconception that parents have about advocating for their kids at school, especially with ADHD or invisible disabilities?
Yeah, and the reason I call them hidden disabilities, that's just like a word we use, just to be clear, is because you can't see the tool, right? So we kind of developed this as we was going into the school with this disability awareness program, and the physical disabilities, you can see the tool, right? You can see the wheelchair, you can see a prosthetic, you could see someone doesn't have a leg or that they're blind. You can't see that someone might have tools inside their head if they're autistic, if they're ADHD, if they're dyslexic. So that's why I call them hidden disabilities. I think that probably
Hmm.
the more formal way would be neurodivergent. But I would say that the most important thing is I think parents really feel like maybe they're being pushy or confrontational or overstepping their bounds, and they're not, right? And there is a way to go about it. And you have to remember that most of these kids, especially elementary age kids, they're with these teachers longer than sometimes they're with you during a day.
Right.
So, what are the things that trigger them? What are the things that help them at school versus home? And you guys talk about it and you collaborate, and that's only going to be successful for your child, right? So, that's something that I really like to help with because I can help you within the school settings because not only am I in these classrooms, I it can hear what's happening at home and then help you to be the advocate that you need to be for your child for school.
See, that's really great because I have had to obviously be an advocate for both my kids. And you do sometimes feel like, "Oh, am I being pushy or whatever?" And then I'm like, "No, my kid needs what they need. So I need to make sure that we get whatever that is." There are certain ways to go about it. The other aspect of this as somebody with ADHD is people with ADHD very often have a people-pleasing tendency, and that makes confrontation very challenging. And so that is a lot of where I think that comes from too is, "Oh, I don't wanna be pushy," and it's because they're afraid they're being confrontational when they're really not. But whenever we push back on anything, it's harder for us because that people pleasing thing is really kind of brutal sometimes. So I am a very strong advocate for advocating for your kids, advocating for yourself, and you're not being pushy. You're just fighting for your kid.
Yeah, and I can help you, and that's sort of what I do. I help you so you don't feel pushy, so that you really are being just the advocate for your child. That's all everybody wants, right? The parents, the teachers, everybody just wants everybody to be successful and feel confident, and come in with a good attitude and feel good about themselves. So I think that being that kind of advocate is the right advocate, and I really
Mhm.
like to help people do that.
Well, and going back to what you said before about making sure that the kid and the parent understand they're on the same team.
Mhm.
And I am always saying this to my kids, especially when they're really struggling with things and they're pushing back against me. I'm like, look, we're on the same side. We're
Yeah.
on the same team. We want to help you succeed. So you have to let us. But I also think we need to have that same conversation with the teachers too, so that everybody is on the same page. And I think that's what you're talking about. And
Mhm.
it makes such a big difference because when I say that to my kids, they kind of go, "Oh, okay." Even though they've heard me
Right.
say it before, sometimes in the moment they kind of forget, you know,
Of
and then they'll kind of
course.
go,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, all right." And it does, it makes a
Mhm.
big difference. Okay. So for parents who are feeling isolated and not good enough, which is, I think, most parents anyway, what are your favorite reframes or maybe mantras to shift them out of shame and into empowerment?
I mean, I really go back to that positive reinforcement, right? And like really trying to do like three positives to a negative. So there's obviously negatives that come in, but if you could then counter it with a positive at least and kind of think about it. The other thing is finding a little bit of a community. I actually have a couple small groups that are going to be starting coming up soon, and I'm thinking it's just a nice way to bring some parents together, and we're going to do some roundtable discussions about behavior and about like what's typical, what's concerning, and going that route too. I think, when we go back to like when we were children and it was ADHD or these neurodivergent or hidden disabilities, they were so like faux pas, right? Everyone, it was so negative about it. And
Yeah.
I really want to take the negative connotation away and, kind of flip it. It's really important to me.
When we're working with kids, right? And we're showing them what their strengths are and they're seeing it for themselves and they're seeing the evidence behind it. Like that then leads obviously to then a more confident kid. And then I think it's just a great way to go into adulthood with that mindset of, yeah, this is like something I can really do something with. This makes me a creative problem solver. This makes me a creative person. This makes me, a really great leader. And I see, gaps and bottlenecks in businesses that other people don't. I mean, there's so many positives to it, but you have to understand too what your challenges are so that you can lean into the strengths as well, because leaning into the strength helps you to overcome a lot of the challenges, or at least make them so they're not quite so like taking over your life. And so I love that you're working with these kids and the parents so early so that they can really get a good foothold on that because that could make a huge difference in how they turn out later in life. So I love that you're doing that.
Sure. The brain mindset and the switching of the positive and negative, and plus on top of it, the early intervention to me is so imperative.
Yeah, I agree. The earlier that we can get kids assessed, especially girls, I mean, all of them, but boys tend to get caught like that. And girls, it's still sometimes a struggle to get them assessed. And when I think of how much potential has been left on the table because of girls being missed, it just makes me so upset because these are girls who have so much potential and they go into their teen years a lot of times or later not understanding why they feel so different and why they struggle. And if we can like you said, the earlier the intervention, it's just it can only lead to good things in my opinion. So, I
It
know
can
some
only I
parents.
agree.
Yeah, so, how do you respond? Because I'm assuming if they're working with you, they already know their kid is neurodivergent. But I get a lot of pushback sometimes from parents saying, "Well, why do they need to have a label?" And I will say, "Look, they're already getting labels, just not labels that you want them to have. Lazy, incompetent, entitled, blah, blah, blah." I would rather the kid know what they're dealing with so that they can create their own labels for their own life later on. That label gives them access to tools, medication, et cetera, that they would not have otherwise. Do you ever run into people who maybe you're working with them, but they're still a little, because sometimes one parent's on board and the other one isn't. So have you ever dealt with something like that?
Yeah, I have actually. I mean, because I do work with people who have young kids, some of them have not even been diagnosed. So I have parents
Okay.
who really are trying to be so proactive and they want to do things and, to see like what can help them in the future and things like that. Right. I will say, just to like rewind a little bit, I go into these classrooms and I talk about these superpowers with these kids. I will tell you that you'll see these kids and like you'll talk about ADHD and you might see these kids like, like, and they don't really say anything. And then by the end, when I'm like, oh, did you know that Michael Jordan had ADHD? What do we think his superpower is? They're like, oh, I play
Ah,
basketball. Or like, or like
right?
Simone Biles, she has ADHD. And they're like, she's a gymnast. I'm a gymnast. And I think when you do it that way, or like even people like you say, Walt Disney World, he was dyslexic. Like, wow, look
Yeah.
how creative he was. And they're like, what? He made Disney World. When you're focusing on I like to say like the coolness of it, right? And making it that it's a cool thing, it takes away that bad label that we are so used to, that our generation looks at it like as a negative, where it's really not a negative. And that's what I tell these kids. I'm like, listen, this is something to celebrate. Like you have things in that brain that so many other people who are not ADHD, they don't have it. And they
Yeah.
really don't. It's the truth. It's not that I'm
Oh,
making
yeah.
this up to make them feel better. I mean, it's true.
Hyper focus is when you can
Mhm.
figure out how to harness that and make sure
Mhm.
you're working on the right thing when you go in it.
Mhm.
I mean, you can knock it out of the park with that,
Sure.
right? It's such a huge gift, and when I was like, "Wait, not everybody can do that?" Like, just suddenly that's why I didn't think I had ADHD for a long time, because 'cause I'm like, "What? Sometimes I can focus, like, for an entire day and not even eat," and you were like, "Yeah, that's hyper focus,
Yeah.
and that's ADHD." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, that makes
I
sense. Okay."
watched it and I watched it firsthand with my son. One of my sons is 20 and he's that guy. Because again, just because I'm saying the hyper focus, that's one part
One.
of it, right? That doesn't mean that everybody with ADHD is going to have a hyper focus and then all of a sudden they're going to be amazing. But my son happens to have that quality, that characteristic of ADHD. When he hyper focuses, he really locks in and can do things that he loves to like another extent. We're like, what? How do you do that? And it's
Yeah.
it's so cool to watch. But he has the
Yeah.
confidence to try new things and he has the confidence to try the things that are interesting to him. And I think that is really the key.
Yeah, that is really important. Trying new things, not being afraid to put yourself out there. I mean, most people have some trepidation about that, regardless of any kind of ADHD or any of
Mhm.
that stuff. But I think, especially when you have been told your whole life you're doing it wrong or whatever, that adds an extra layer. So I love that he's so confident to like be like, yeah, I'm going to try it anyway. Let's just see what happens. I love that because I did not have that as a kid, and I wish I had. Okay, so what changes do you see in families after working with you? Like both in the short term and the long term? What wins do you see?
I mean, I definitely see more confidence. I definitely feel like families feel a little more calm. I have a lot of people who come to me and they're like, our house is so crazy. It's so chaotic. Nobody gets along. Everyone's yelling. Everyone's this. And then they leave. And there really is a sense of calm that comes over their house. They do learn to speak with each other. They learn some fun family, like new family. I don't know if I want to say traditions, but maybe like habits that they start to do, like little silly things. Like it could be when you just go around the dinner table talking about your highs and your lows of your day or things like that. Like I said from the beginning, for me, I find this to be simple. I like to keep it simple. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's really what's gonna work best for you and your family, like, what are your issues and what's happening, and let's make this so that everybody can feel more calm and more at peace. Listen, everyone has these big days. They go to school, you have extracurriculars, you're at work, you do this, you do this. Home is supposed to be the place that you come and it's calm and it's
Mhm.
safe and you feel at peace, and for everybody involved, mom, dad, all siblings, a lot of independence, especially with the littles. That's the other part that we bring in so that they can feel it. And I also want to add that I think it's important. I like to teach the kids to be their own advocates. So I know that's
Yes.
harder when they're little, but as they grow and teaching them these tools of how to speak up, because as bad as it may sound, nobody's looking really out for you except for you, right? In the end. And so you have to be your own advocate.
What's interesting is both my kids were pretty strong advocates for themselves when they were younger, but then when they got older and they
Mm.
didn't wanna draw attention to themselves, that changed. So I think that is something that you probably helped to counter. Let's just get this in your system now when they're
Mhm.
young. Because I was like, "Oh, my kids are really good at advocating for themselves," and all of a sudden it, like, stopped, and I was like, "Wait, what happened?" And their teachers would be like, they don't wanna feel like they're the center, they don't wanna be called out. I was like, "Okay, I get it."
But
Um,
you also
but
don't have to be the person raising your hand or sitting in the front row to be your own advocate, right? Like
right.
there are plenty of ways you can do that. If you're in high school, you can go see your teacher at office hours, or like in middle school, right? You could stay after school, before school. You could send an email. There are a lot of
Mhm.
ways to be your own advocate and to speak up for yourself.
So, how do you approach boundaries and self-care for parents who are they're used to putting everybody else first and they're not recognizing that they also need to have some boundaries and some self-care?
Yeah, that's going to be, this is a forever, right? This is a forever. I definitely fall into this category. I have always fallen in this category. I am naturally a selfless person. And so having kids for me was just very natural, and creating our life around them made it really difficult for it to be about myself. It's like you're on the airplane and everybody says you take the oxygen mask yourself and then you give it to your kid. And think in your head like, I wouldn't do that. I would for sure do my kid first, but it really is true, right? Like when you do things and you really are so happy to your own core, then you only are going to live your best life, right? You ever hear when you're dating someone, right? Or you're doing something, like you could never be truly happy with somebody else until you're happy with yourself. And I think that goes as a parent also. It's not just in a relationship with a spouse or whatever. I think that it has also to do with you as a person. So, what are the things that make you feel good? Like I know when I go with certain friends that are true to me, that I know like are only there for me and support me, or like laughing with them or whatever it is, like that fills me up, right? Like that really like makes me feel great. I personally like love a long walk. I love listening to live music. I go to yoga, but I found these things about myself as I've evolved as a person, as I've evolved as a mom, as a wife, all of the above. So I my thing would be find your thing, right? Find your thing that when you leave it, you're like, "Oh."
Well, and I also think in terms of boundaries, I have certainly been guilty of this where we sometimes don't give our kids enough credit, especially when they're still younger and we tend to hover a little too much because I know helicopter parenting has been discussed a lot in recent years and I have definitely tried to not be, but I know I have, but I think that that's also an important set of boundaries for parents to have, which is let your kids fail. Obviously, not something that's gonna, like, hurt them. Well, I think society in general is not great at this, but I think sometimes too, when your kids do have some kind of disability or challenges, sometimes it makes it a little too easy to hover too much. And like I said, I know I have been guilty of it, especially when my kids were young. All right. You mentioned positive reinforcement is a game changer. You've said that a few times now. So, can you walk us through what it looks like in everyday life, not just in theory, maybe a real life situation you had with a client.
Yeah, I mean, I really sincerely believe it can be so simple. So, like, if you're waiting for your child to clean up their room and they are supposed to be doing that, but they are doing something else, right? And then you just do like a little reminder, like, are you supposed to be cleaning up your room? Well, you have to also remember them cleaning up their room might not be the same ideas of what you think their room should look like, right? So I think it's also, I think it's important to say, like, oh my God,
That's
good
an
job,
understatement.
right? Like like you did it. Like you did try. Like you did try something. Or like if you're getting ready for school and all of a sudden, I'm talking littles, right? This is all age, dependent. But say all of
Yeah.
a sudden they're getting their shoes on and it's like, "Wow, are you putting your shoes on? I didn't even tell you to put your shoes on today." Or you came right in the house and started your homework. That's amazing that you're doing that. I mean, it really is some of these simple things that maybe when they're doing it, you say something before they're waiting for it, right? Or before you have to
That is,
tell
yeah.
them.
Yes, I think that's a great point. You're saying that the cleaning the room thing reminded me of this video that I saw with this little girl comes out and she's like, "Do you want to come see?" And she's little and she's got like a little leotard and little tutu on, and she's so proud of herself. And the mom's like, "What'd you do?" She's like, "I cleaned my room." And so the mom's like, "So she has cleaned her room for the first time by herself. Let's go see what we've got." And you turn the girl, and this kid's bolting down to her room.
Hmm.
She literally took everything out of her room except for like her bed and her dresser. Everything else was just out in the hallway. The parents did such a good job. They're like, "Wow. So, yes, your room is the floor is definitely clean." And the
Right.
brother's laughing. He's like, "I can't even get to my room." But it was just so cute how she was so proud of herself.
Hmm.
And those parents could have totally ruined that moment, but they were just like, "You worked so hard on this. You should be so." And she was just like beaming. But that's
And
what it made me think of.
that's a perfect example though. I mean, that's absolutely a perfect example. So instead of being like, "What? This isn't cleaning your room. You did it wrong. You didn't," because what's right and wrong? You know what I mean? And when it comes to situations like that, and so it's like you really have to create the situations to make them right. That's really
Yes.
our job as the parent.
Well, and the parents were trying so hard not to laugh. They turned the corner and it startled them. You could tell. They're like, "Oh." It was awesome.
Great.
All
Yeah,
right.
that's cute. That's cute.
So for listeners that are considering getting support, what is one small action they can try this week to create, a more calm and connected home?
Yeah. I mean, I think really focusing on being in the present is huge. I think when we're doing a million tasks at home and then we're also spitting out, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. Why don't you put yourself in that moment and be present? Look in their eyes, right? Sit down with them, actually have the conversation instead of making dinner, but then also being like, but did you do this? Did you do this? Which I understand. We all do that. But try that. Try seeing what it's like to just look in each other's eyes, try to be calm, try to then remove yourself if all of a sudden it's just too much. That's another one. I think the other thing too is like when you're out and about and you're doing things like whatever you're doing, your kids are emulating you. Whatever every single thing you do. So you have to remember that if you take the time to sit and talk to them, they know that you're sitting and taking the time and being present. And then they understand that with the people that they talk to, with the people that they engage with, you know, and it could just be that simple. And I would maybe like take a walk as a family, right? Walk around the block. A lot of times, too, it's not about all of the questions, it's about listening. You don't necessarily need a lot of answers as much as, when you hear like, every time my kid comes home, I say, "How was school?" And they say, "Fine." But why don't
You just
right?
heard that with my kid, how it's still
Right.
fine.
How was fine.
Yeah.
Did you have a good day? Yeah. What'd you do? I don't know, nothing. And that's what they say. But why don't you change it, right? Why don't you say something like, "Who'd you sit next to at lunch today? Who'd you play with at recess?" And like you ask one question and then it spirals. And the other
Mhm.
thing you could do is you can repeat something that they say. So like if you say, "Who did you have lunch with?" and they say Susie, and you say, "Oh, Susie." And then, "I don't know Susie." And then they start telling you about Susie.
that track. As they get older, it does get harder to yank information out of them. I try to have, like, what I call just mom and kid dates, with them
Mhm.
individually, and I
Mhm.
find I get much more information that way. It's not like I'm digging for information, I just wanna connect with them,
Yeah, and
and
I think a lot also a good time to connect, which is not everyone's favorite time to connect, but is at night before bed. And I know when you have teenagers, they go to bed later than you per se, but I would say that is when you get a lot of information, is when you, and especially with the littler kids, like if you're laying in bed reading a book and you ask a question. I mean, my kids would sit and talk to me for hours and hours. I'd be like, okay, we have to go to bed now, and you get exhausted. And I understand it's not always your best time, but for high school kids, my best advice that I could ever give would just be present when they want to talk.
yeah.
And I know you don't want to just drop everything and do that, but it really will make the difference because they know that you are there for them.
Yeah, when your kids recognize that you are a stable presence and that no matter what, you're there to listen, it really does make a difference in how much they are willing to share in those moments when they do want to. And so I feel really fortunate because my both my kids have talked to me about things that I don't know that I would have talked to my parents about. And I had great parents, but they were, this was the 80s and 70s
Yeah.
and, so it was different. We are now on to the rapid fire round. So I am going to ask you some questions and then
Okay.
you just answer whatever comes off the top of your head. Okay, are you ready?
Oh, okay. Sure.
All right, here's the first one. What's one ADHD life hack that you use daily?
Lists. I
Yes.
love lists.
I know we make lists of lists, don't we? It's like an incredible thing. All right. Most surprising thing that you have learned from a kid or a parent.
Kids surprise me every day. Will always be smarter than you all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the words of wisdom that come out of them, you're like, how old are
Mhm.
you? You're like trapped in the
Yeah,
body of a 5-year-old.
I love
Um,
it. There used to be that show. There used to be a show that was like, "Are you smarter than a 5th grader?" or something like
oh, yeah.
that, and those kids.
And there was a show a long time ago. I think it was called Kids Say the Darndest Things or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, man. They are. We have my husband and I, sorry, I'm a little bit of a tangent. My husband and I we have a list that we started keeping when the kids were young about just funny things they would say. Cause you always think you're gonna remember it and then you don't. And like my daughter in particular, like one time she was just like, she said to her Aunt Mo, my heart wants to throw salad at you. And it was just, like, the funniest thing, and you're trying to not laugh because she was upset, but it was
Yeah.
just like, "Wow, what is she visualizing? Dad's
Uh,
food tastes like dirty medicine with socks on it," or something like that. We're like, "Okay," and it wasn't bad, it was, like, a really great dish, but I think she was upset with it. I don't know, she's a very creative kid, but yeah, they do say very funny things.
My family actually, we started doing that. I have, like, a note section in my phone, and
Yeah.
even, like, as the teenagers, like, we keep track of these funny things that they say 'cause it's
Oh,
entertaining.
yeah. Yeah. My son one day, he came out of his room at, like, 2 in the afternoon, and he's like, "Good after morning noon," and I I just thought that was the funniest thing, and I was like, "Write that one down." Um, so I love that. Alright, what is a favorite way to reset your own nervous system in a tough moment?
Breath. Always breath.
Yep, agree with you on that. Book or resource you recommend to every ADHD family?
Well, I am currently publishing a book that I wrote. It is a children's book and
Exciting!
very exciting. So it should be ready within like a month or so, I think. It's in the works right now. I don't have one that I specifically always I because everybody just has something different. This book is a children's book that I developed that when I was going into these classrooms, and I always feel that when I'm standing in front of the class or I'm talking, it's like, oh, that lady's back and she's just talking, and 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 I don't want to be that lady. I like fun and silly and good, and I'm only in this classroom for small amounts of time, so I only want you to remember me as like that fun person who came in, right? So
Yeah,
I was talking about ADHD, and I was talking about the fact that it shows differently, and obviously it can show differently boy girl, but obviously just everybody. So I came home and I wrote a story, a children's book about what it would be like to have a boy and a girl who are the same age, who are twins, and how ADHD completely presents itself differently in both of those people.
I love that.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, like I said, my kids are totally different from each other and they're both different from me. So
Mhm.
and just have it done in a way that they're, again, teaching to how they learn.
Yep.
I love it. All right.
Thanks.
If you could put a billboard outside every school, what would it say?
Find your calm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really about calm. I really am about calm, simple, peace, positivity. Those are my mantras. They really are.
Yes. Yeah. And I know you live it, which is really nice, right? You're not all talk. So I love that we
Thank
need a
you.
lot of kindness in the world right now. So I am so happy that that is the things you're
That
choosing to
we
do.
do. That we do. Mm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for joining me. I know that our listeners learned a lot today. I've learned a lot. I always love talking to you. What is the best way for people to reach you?
You can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm actually on TikTok. I have a website, Guided Growth Consulting. And it was
All
such a
right.
pleasure. I always love talking to you too.
Oh, thank you. All right, great. So I will have all of her information in the description. If this episode resonated with you, please like and subscribe and comment what your biggest takeaway was from today. I know that you guys learned a lot. I really learned a lot today. And the more that you do this, the more ADHD women we can help. Okay? And lastly, if you want personalized support for your ADHD, I work with women one on one and through my Clarity in Action Intensive. So you can apply for a free clarity call to see if we are a good fit. The link for that is in the description. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It really means so much. And we will be back next week with a brand new episode. So stay tuned for that. And until then, you know what I say? Stay curious.